Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the British Academy for our busy May lecture. We're very excited to welcome two speakers this evening, Dr. Sébastien Rey and Dr. Ebru Torun, who will present the Girsu Project in Iraq, a holistic approach to heritage management, combining archaeological research, training, and site conservation. The Girsu Project is a collaboration between the British Museum and the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage in Iraq. It combines research, on-site training, and heritage management at Tello, the ancient city of Girsu. Girsu is a Sumerian megacity, the remains of which today feature massive excavation pits and spoil heaps, which are the remnants of late 19th and early 20th century looting and excavation. As such, many architectural features were poorly documented, meaning that the spectacular finds from the site, now held in museums across the world, lack proper archaeological context. In response, the Girsu Project is directing a program of rescue excavation, site conservation, and site documentation using cutting-edge methods and technology. Dr. Sébastien Rey is the curator for ancient Mesopotamia at the British Museum and director of the Girsu Project in Iraq. Having obtained a doctorate in archaeology from the Sorbonne University in Paris, he has conducted fieldwork in Syria and has directed the excavations at Girsu since 2015. Dr. Ebru Torun is an architect at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara, specializing in conservation and heritage management. Holding a PhD in archaeology, she has worked at archaeological sites in Turkey and Egypt and has been the site conservator and heritage manager for the Girsu Project since 2018. So, without further ado, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to this evening's speakers.
All right. So testing, 1, 2, 3, can you hear me? Is the microphone on? Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Gareth. And I should say that, in fact, Gareth was one of the founding members of the Girsu Project in 2016. And it is within his excavation trench that we found the first remains of the temple of Ningirsu back in 2016. Which of course proved to be a great omen, so thank you, Gareth. And I think you can even spot him in the panoramic photograph. So thank you also to the British Institute for inviting us today, Ebru, myself, to present the Girsu Project. It's really a pleasure, an honor to discuss this project in this great setting. And as Gareth mentioned, I guess the first thing to say about this project is that it is indeed first and foremost a collaborative venture between two partner institutions. I should say two long-standing partners, the British Museum and the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. And the project, in fact, brings together the two partners around what we like to call a common vision which is indeed founded on 3 pillars: research through excavation, survey, remote sensing, capacity building, training, and of course, the protection of cultural heritage through site conservation and heritage management. Now, this common vision was developed over a number of years, and thanks to the important feedback that we have received over the past years from key stakeholders, particularly in Iraq, and I would like to take this opportunity tonight to express my gratitude to the many officials from the Ministry of Culture in Iraq, from the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. I also would like to pay tribute to one particularly important individual of this project, my dear friend Fatma Yassir Hussein, the Deputy Director of the Girsu Project. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be present tonight. She has been really instrumental since the beginning of the project in coordinating the many meetings and, of course, leading on the discussions. The current iteration of the Girsu Project would never have seen the light of day without the important, generous support from the Medita Trust. So, since 2016, since the launch of the project, about 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, we have carried out a total of 12 fieldwork seasons at the site. Each season, the Girsu team is made up of about 70 to 80 people including, of course, all the specialists necessary for a project like this one, archaeologists, conservators, philologists, and so on. 4 inspectors from the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage appointed to the project each season. We host between 6 and 10 trainees, so either employees of the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage from offices across Iraq, and a university student, again from universities across Iraq. The Girsu project works very closely with the local communities living around the site, and each season we hire about 50 workers. As for the venue for the fieldwork, for the site conservation, for the training, the site of Girsu, the modern Tello, it has long been considered as one of the great treasures of Iraq, and I would argue of world heritage. Now, this is the site which revealed, or more exactly, led to the confirmation of the existence of the Sumerian civilization, the lost Sumerian culture at the end of the 19th century. Girsu is one of the very first cities, and in its heyday, in the 3rd millennium BC, it was revered by the Sumerians as one of the great sanctuaries, a holy city, dedicated to one of ancient Mesopotamia's most important charismatic gods, the hero god Ningirsu. He was also a god of agriculture. Of course, among the great treasures discovered or rediscovered at the site in the 1870s was a collection of stone statues, of beautiful stone statues depicting this king, Gudea, who ruled the ancient city of Girsu and the state of Lagash at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, over 4,000 years ago. And it's really important to remember that the rediscovery of the statues of Gudea, the almost life-size statues of this king, always in a position of prayer with his hands interlocked, really created a sensation, I mean a worldwide shockwave. And well beyond the very small circle of scientific academia. The statues of Gudea have inspired, in the first half of the 20th century, the arts, the humanities. The figure of Gudea continues, of course, to inspire many artists, especially in Iraq, and is considered almost an icon. As for his home city, as for the city of Girsu, well, as you can see from this recent drone photograph of the sacred precinct, the district of temples, well, it is shaped by enormous, huge spall heaps. Now, these are the discarded archaeological remains from the early excavations and excavation pits. Now, these scars upon the surface of the site are real issues for the site today, in terms of its conservation, of course, and also in terms of its preservation, sustainable preservation. Most of the architectural features of Girsu, of the Sumerian city of Girsu, were exposed much too quickly with hundreds of workers between 1877 and 1933. They were very poorly recorded. Some monuments of Girsu were not even documented. And the important finds, the objects, including, of course, the spectacular statues of Gudea, were uprooted without archaeological context. And also, the site has been extensively looted already in the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. The site was also extensively looted following the 2 wars in the 1990s and early 2000s. So indeed, the Girsu project aims first and foremost to respond to these issues. However, it is at heart a training program. So we have tailored our training sessions, our training modules over the years in close consultation with our partners in Iraq, the universities, the State Board of Antiquities, and Heritage. And we aim to deliver sessions dedicated to rescue archaeology, to site conservation, and to heritage management. So since the launch of the project in 2016, we have opened a total of 16 excavation areas across the site. Now, of course, these excavations range from very small targeted soundings to large excavations. We have also carried out 4 surveys, fieldwork surveys, across the site with university students. We have delivered a number of important research projects, including this one, in collaboration with Qadisiyeh University in Iraq, so focusing on the ancient waterscape of the site of Girsu. So identifying the dried up canals, channels of the site, as well as excavating these channels and collecting a wide range of samples, including shells for C14 dating. So the Girsu project provides for us, for our colleagues, our partners in Iraq, a great opportunity of developing what we like to call an inclusive model of best practice. What we mean is a holistic approach which combines research as well as site conservation and heritage management and training. So this, we believe, is important in view of creating a co-curated development plan, not just for the site of Girsu, the archaeological site, as well its surroundings, the living landscape of Girsu today. So this diagram summarizes our holistic approach, the interdisciplinary structure, and I'm going to hand over now to its chief architect, Ebru, who indeed has been instrumental since she joined the project in shaping this holistic approach.
Well, thank you, Sébastien. Welcome, everyone. Indeed, let me elaborate a little bit more about what we like to call the pioneering approach to archaeology, our methodology, and how and why we came up with this new approach. As you all know, actually, that the concepts in conservation theory has changed a lot in the past, since the 1930s, in the past decades. We no longer talk about just individual monuments. The concepts have evolved from monuments, first to monuments and sites, and then we started to call them cultural resources or cultural property. Then came the idea of heritage, intangible and tangible. And today, actually, we're talking about landscapes. In fact, in other disciplines, what is called socio-ecological systems. We are talking about not only physical remains, but we're talking about living, dynamic landscapes, historic landscapes with a deep past. So knowing this, in fact, we wanted to design a project for Girsu, which is exactly a fantastic example of a historical landscape with a very impressive deep history. And it has so complex problems, not only as an archaeological site, but with its setting in modern-day Iraq, southern Iraq, with all its political, economic, climatic problems. So we realized from the beginning that we cannot only approach the bridge at Girsu, or we cannot only approach Girsu as an archaeological site. We have to understand the landscape of Tello Girsu. So therefore, we designed the project, as Sébastien mentioned, where conservation is not just something we may choose to do after excavations are finished, but is from the beginning, timed and budgeted within the interdisciplinary structure. We also borrow each other's methodologies. We listen to each other. From the beginning, each excavation is discussed, how big it should be, where it should be, what are we going to do with the exposed remains, are we going to rebury, are we going to include it into visitors' routes. So, and all of this is not like a luxurious addition to an archaeological project, but it's really the core. Our aim is to actually contribute to a kind of sustainable development of the whole territory. Of course, we are aware that we are just an archaeological project, but at least we should be able to understand the potentials, the opportunities and constraints of the whole territory, and where heritage then sits in that picture. That's something we want to contribute in our project. Of course, once the project structure was in place, I also had to come up with actual conservation strategies and methodologies. And where to start with it was, of course, obviously this amazing structure that it's in fact the only major tangible structure that is at the moment visible on the site. And when we started in 2018, when I started, it was in really dire need of conservation. So it was also the most difficult structure to conserve, so why not start to establish our conservation methodology from the most difficult spot, and then we can use the same methodology across the site. That was my idea. And the methodology we came up with is, in fact, everything that has been discussed since the 30s in the field of conservation, as I just mentioned, starting from the idea of a monument and then including the communities into it. So all the ideas that developed in the last decades, we wanted to merge them into one methodology in Girsu, which means that, of course, you have to start with understanding what you're dealing with. So Bauforschung, as we call it, building research, which involves like a proper documentation and study of the building, historical comparative research, investigations of the building in detail in material structure and understanding the deterioration processes, and to come up with hypothetical restitutions if we can. But then after that, we don't jump immediately to interventions. We just sort of, after focusing in, zooming in, we just actually step back. And now we ask ourselves, what is the significance of this building? What is the significance of this site? And not only from our perspective, because we know perfectly well how historically important Girsu, or this enigmatic structure as the French excavators called, are, but we need to understand the perspective of different stakeholders that are involved, not only the local community, but also the state, the region of Dikar, because conservation interventions can, can range from just reburying, perhaps, to reconstruction. So in fact, you have to come up with a common vision for the future of the site to be able to decide on what sort of conservation you're going to perform, what should be your methods, and what you should end up with as a site. So that's why it's important to do this, what we call the significance, values and significance research. And then we design the interventions, which then turns into a kind of heritage management plan for the whole site. And how do we do that? We start with defining the archaeological context. That's where architects and archaeologists start to work together, which is not always a very evident collaboration. But in this case, I think we are a good example. Where Sébastien just mentioned the hydrology, like waterscape research. When we were working on the bridge, of course, I focused on what information can I get from archaeological evidence. And one evidence I could get was the fact that this structure, this enigmatic structure, as I will call for a while, sits on a canal, was sitting actually located on an ancient canal. That's for sure because Sébastien and archaeological teams have also conducted excavations actually to determine the stratigraphy, and we could actually really prove that we have the canal stratigraphy. The longer excavations in the northern part actually have proven that we can be 100% sure there was a canal here. And another thing we learned was from remote sensing and actually observations on the site after a rainy day, for instance, we see that a road actually joins this structure from the east. Furthermore, we also, again, what we learned from archaeology, we conducted a series of soundings along the walls, which showed us several things. One, the most important thing is, in fact, what has changed since the French excavations. So French left in 1933, they excavated this structure quite fast, all the way down to the foundations, and they left it as it is in a basin at the lowest part of the city. And of course, what happened in the past 90 years, every time it rained, the basin was flooded and silt was brought in. So gradually, in fact, the structure was reburied about 1.90 meters. So what we see today is, in fact, the upper half of the structure. So there's still another more or less 2 meters under the soil. So our excavations, the soundings, have shown that the walls are actually in a more or less what I could call well-preserved condition, although, of course, very much eroded. But we can actually understand the photographs much better the ancient photographs, which was our historical research, of course. We read all the reports and we looked at all the photographs we could find, what has changed since the 1930s. And of course, the next step is then really where the architects come into the picture. We start documenting, recording the building, and that from a bigger scale of, you probably all know, the latest 3D documentation techniques. So we have a 3D point cloud of the structure, out of which we can make as many sections and elevation drawings as we want. But then, of course, that's not enough, you know, like especially this, when you don't touch the building, when you don't measure it yourself, when you don't study it yourself, you don't understand it very well. So it's all very good to capture in 15 minutes a 3D model of the building, but in fact, what is important is to study it brick by brick. So we also started to make drawings and studies of the sections where, how the masonry changes, how deep further down the walls go, how far we are from the water table, and so on. And as I said, again, brick by brick study teaches us a lot. We have understood in the meantime that the building was, 9 different types of bricks at least were used in the construction of this structure. And what we see, as I say, at the upper half already shows us how many times it has been repaired. And even like a certain horizon along across the building shows us that at least 16 rows were additional rows at a later phase, because these were a specific type of thicker bricks that were also used for a very obvious extension towards the north. So there has been at least a few, I'm sure, a few building phases which are very difficult to date. But what we can say is that the earlier phases, you see more rows of stretchers. Later phases, probably together with the phase where they started to use new bricks, you see a mix and match of different types of bricks, where rows of headers and rows of stretchers start to show. And then the last phase, as we call it, is only rows of headers and stretchers. So this is just to show you how much you learn from studying brick by brick, different interventions to the structure. Another thing, of course, we studied was the use of mortars, because we have 2 different types, bituminous mortars and mud mortars. And that also shows different phases of intervention and repair. Of course, not only observations, but we also have taken a lot of samples, and material studies are being conducted in Istanbul right now in a lab. And this study, thorough study, hands-on study on the site or at the building, also revealed some in situ inscribed bricks, which were none of them were actually bricks identifying the brick structure. They were inscriptions talking about other buildings, mostly from the Ningirsu period. So it also shows how many different types of bricks from different structures were incorporated into the structure. So after all this research, all the evidence that we could collect, what were the conclusions that we could come up with? So these are the key conclusions. I can summarize this building as a kind of symmetrical structure, like symmetrical wing walls around the canal, supported by buttresses, which actually all sit nicely into a circle with the center in the middle of 33 meters in diameter, which is, and you can see the green part, the northern extension wall is very obvious when you see on the site and on the plan, which was added later on, possibly because the canal was shifting, it tended to shift towards the east to block the water again. So what does this construction do? It's like this X shape where the north-south axis is very dominant. So we can also say that it was not randomly placed on the canal. So they started with the north-south axis. That's how they placed the structure. And the ancient canal axis actually sits on a 330-degree, which is similar northwest-southeast orientation as we see in the urban fabric as well. And the other thing we notice, of course, studying this building, is that the 3 buttresses or 3 foundations we see on both sides at the narrowest part of the structure, they are different than the other buttresses. The other buttresses, they are actually leaning against the levees, whereas these three are closer to each other and thicker structures. Therefore, we think they were separate, they were different than the other buttresses. So these are the things we could definitely put on paper as facts that we know, and therefore we came to the idea that this was actually a structure that carried a bridge over a canal, which makes sense, of course. So this is the first hypothetical restitution Sébastien worked on, and of course we can argue about the shape and the form, but in fact it presents clearly the idea that this structure actually carried a bridge. But then came the question, did you need such a big and complex structure just to make a bridge? So we also explored the idea that this was more than just a bridge, and perhaps it was a hydraulic structure. And for that, I didn't have many comparisons. I didn't have any historic comparisons, actually. But what did I do? I decided to look at contemporary hydraulic structures. And the one that was really striking, the resemblance was striking, was what we call today as partial flume. It's actually a hydraulic structure that is used to measure water flow. But as you can see, the plan is very similar to what we have in Girsu. So I'm not going to go so far to say that Sumerians built this structure to measure the flow, although we know Sumerians measured everything when they could. But what we know is that this structure was built, the flumes are actually built and function in a way that they collect the water, they funnel the water, and constrict it in the middle, and then direct it towards the desired direction. And what it does, what we know that what this configuration does, is that it accelerates the water. It's a little bit like pinching the mouth of a hose when you're giving water to the plants. So we do know that this configuration will have accelerated the water flow. We also know from the flumes that it lowers the water level downstream. But interestingly, it doesn't affect the water levels upstream. So that's a very useful structure, actually, if you just want to, for instance, to accelerate the water level. Whether it was used, whether it was functioned as a flow measuring device, we cannot prove, we do not know. But I find it very likely that this was not only a bridge, but also a hydraulic structure. As for how to continue and actually go ahead and preserve this structure, we started with, of course, understanding the deterioration, the mechanisms of decay on this building. And this is how we found the structure when we first started, where basal erosion, as we call it, the wall bases, although we are not at the base, but the current ground level was enormously deteriorated and causing structural problems. And at the beginning, we just record what is manifested. And then we start thinking about what are the dynamics, what is actually causing the biggest decay. Of course, one of the obvious decay agents, as we all know, is water. And we have water damage in two ways at Girsu, especially at the bridge. One is the fact that the bridge was left in a deep basin, as I said, and every time it rained, the basin got flooded. So it was a swimming pool practically, like water reaching up to 1 meter all around. That is one source of water. The second one, as I mentioned, we studied the water table as well, the relationship of water table with the structure. We know that the building, the walls are almost practically sitting on the water table during the high season. And in October, December, in autumn season, we have like a meter and a half between the base of the walls and the water table. So there's a continuous process of rising damp. And as you know, it's not just the existing of the damp or the water, but it's in fact the evaporation and the existing of salts that cause the damage. So what we have here is when the water is absorbed by the walls and tries to evaporate from the nearest, exit, it actually brings all the salts to the surface, and when the water evaporates, salts recrystallize, and they often recrystallize behind the surface. So it means we are not only having a little bit of flaking, but we are losing centimeters of pieces from bricks every time. So this is the mechanism of decay in Girsu. and we had to decide on how to intervene. So we, as I said before, we picked our result, how to say it, our interventions in conservation. We stepped back and we did ask ourselves, what do we want to see? Because in Iraq there is this tradition of reconstructions, and often you find people expecting reconstructions when you talk about conservation. That was one aspect we had to, talk with the authorities, talk with the locals. And the other aspect was there was no way, for instance, of using reburial as a solution. Nowhere at Girsu, because Girsu is one of the sites as seen with the most potential in the region of southern Iraq. For instance, the Dikar province is hoping to combine Ur together with Girsu to promote tourism. So there is no way that you could promote reburying the structure, whereas some of my colleagues did propose, this would be the ideal, perhaps the only way to protect this building. So you have to, like, as I said, step back and understand who is expecting what from the structure. But again, we are also one of the stakeholders, and we also had to come up with our values. And we said there's also one very important value of this structure and the whole of Girsu, which is overlooked, is the ruin value. So we shouldn't forget that why we are so impressed seeing this structure, seeing Girsu, because it's an abandoned archaeological site. It's just what we have are the traces of a lost civilization. So coming up, we should not lose the feeling of discovery when you first arrive at Girsu. So based on these criteria, we actually came up with conservation decisions. We convinced also the ministry, we convinced also the locals who were thinking we were going to rebuild the bridge, that we are just going to try to prolong its life. With minimum intervention, we will not do any reconstructions, which would anyhow be very hypothetical on a structure like this. And we would use locally available materials and find solutions applicable by the local workforce, and we would make sure that the solutions would be reversible. So how did we do that? So when I say we had to attack the problems, the root causes, one was, as I said, the flooding. We started with drainage solutions, and for that, I didn't have to go and look for the sophisticated modern drainage solutions. I had to make do with what we had as materials, being, in this case, plastic crates that we use upside down, and we created channels connecting to detention bases. So every time it rains now, the water is collected in our channels and directed to the detention basins away from the walls. The other problem, rising damp, this big war I have with rising damp, how we solved it is, in fact, using traditional bricks produced in Karbala that we discovered would be the best solution in this case, because these are very porous, low-fired bricks that absorb humidity very fast, and they are lighter and less strong than the original bricks. So what we do is not a reconstruction. We actually mend the walls, we repair the walls, we solve the structure problems by masonry repairs, where then these very porous sponge-like bricks actually absorb the rising damp, and evaporation happens on our walls, on the new masonry, and not anymore on the ancient structure. So we also make sure that we break the outer surfaces of the brick, so we make sure that it doesn't come across as a reconstruction, but a repair, actually. So in a way, also, this kind of repair doesn't have to be an imitation of the original. It's very practical to do. It absorbs mistakes of the mason as well, so you have to find solutions that you can work with. So far, this has been successfully applied along the bridge. And another, maybe a small note on capping. On top, we also have wall tops are also vulnerable, so we use just mud capping to keep the bricks they tend to, move apart, to keep the bricks together and to protect the wall tops. So at the end, the bridge looks, what I can say is that you normally have these dramatic before and after pictures, like after pictures are so different. In fact, my aim was that it should not be so different. So we even keep the memory of the loss. We keep the textures and the colors and the silhouette. So that was my intention when I chose the conservation solutions. And as you can see, the top is before and the bottom is after conservation. And this is in fact the methodology, so it works for the bridge, it should work for the whole site. So this is going to be applied from this, well, we established this methodology to apply across the site, which meant that I had to negotiate with Sébastien where to excavate, how much to excavate. So I'm going to leave the word to Sébastien again to show us fantastic results of the excavations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I should say it is a debate. It is a very constructive debate. We do argue, I mean, but it is also, I think, what makes this project unique in Iraq is that it is really very much hand-in-hand conservation and excavation. So I'll show you now some of the results from our excavations. I should also say perhaps that it's true that the fieldwork that we carry out, that our colleagues carry out at other sites in Iraq are excellent examples on how the new research can really shed some incredibly important and new light on some of the great questions, those key questions that have captivated the world for very long. So questions relating, for example, around the invention of writing, the birth of cities, the meaning of sacred spaces and temples in the ancient world, as well as the question of the decline, the collapse of the Sumerian civilization, for example, at the beginning of the second millennium BC. And this particular important question relating to the decline of these cities, the issues of water management in the past can also shed perhaps some light on some of the present-day issues and particularly relating to the climate crisis. So it is really within this fascinating new context, I would say, of new research agendas in Iraq, after so many years, so many decades, in fact, of fieldwork interruptions, that we discovered in 2016 and excavated over a number of years one of the great sanctuaries of ancient Mesopotamia. Now, this was the great temple dedicated to the patron god, Ningirsu, built by Gudea at the end of the 3rd millennium BC. It's really important to remember that until the renewed excavation in 2016, in the context of the Girsu Project, this temple, which was praised in ancient times for its splendor, for its magnificence, for its importance, not just for the city of Girsu, for the entire landscape of the land of Sumer, was only known by ancient inscriptions. Ancient inscriptions and also a plan that was carved on one of the statues of Gudea unearthed at the site in the 1880s. So indeed, the search for this temple has obsessed many generations of archaeologists, of philologists, ever since the early excavations and its discovery in 2016, its excavation until 2022, and today its conservation mark an important milestone in the renewed exploration as well as the preservation, the sustainable preservation of the incredible archaeology of ancient Iraq. I'm very happy to announce that we have already published the final monograph detailing the excavation at the temple site in 2024, so last year, and that was just 2 years after the end of our excavations. So this was an important commitment that we made to the Iraq State Board of Antiquities and Heritage when we started the excavation, and I'm extremely pleased and proud that the team has indeed delivered on this important objective. So if I had to summarize in just 2 words the essence of the Girsu project, I would certainly choose rescue plus archaeology. Because rescue archaeology is ultimately what brings together the 2 partner institutions, the British Museum, the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage, around this goal, which is the preservation, the sustainable preservation of cultural heritage. In 2022, we decided to move our fieldwork operations from the temple site to another site of ancient Girsu, a mound named Tablet Hill. Now this was named tablet hill or the mound of the tablets after the disastrous looting and excavations that took place in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Tablet Hill is arguably and sadly one of, if not the most damaged and looted mounds, archaeological mounds anywhere in the world. And just to give you a sense as well as a scale of the disaster, we estimate that 70,000, perhaps more, cuneiform clay tablets have been looted from this site in the late 19th and early 20th century. So you ask me, what is our main objective here? Well, to put it simply, to rescue or save what can be saved of the archaeology, the remaining archaeology of Tablet Hill. And after 6 really difficult seasons of excavations, of rescue excavations, we were able, well, first of all, to retrieve some of the discarded tablets, so the overlooked tablets that were just simply thrown away in the giant spoil heaps of the late 19th, early 20th century. Of course, all of these tablets have been conserved in the dig house and safely delivered to the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. But more importantly, we were also able to expose undisturbed, so preserved archaeology dating to the second half of the 3rd millennium BC, from the early dynastic period, around the middle of the 3rd millennium, to the very end of the 3rd millennium, the Ur-free period. We were also able to identify some of the rooms of the many state archives that were built on Tablet Hill. So rooms that once contained these administrative tablets, linking the looted tablets with some of the newly excavated documents and also sealings that we found. So recontextualizing and reconstructing parts of the ancient archives belonging to some of the rulers of the early dynastic period of Girsu, of Gudea, and also of some of the governors under Akkad and Ur-free rule. So one of the highlights of our excavations in Tablet Hill, and some of you may have seen this recently in the news, the old Akkadian state archives belonging to this governor named Lugal, Ushumgal. Now he was the governor appointed by the king Naram-Sin. He was the grandson of Sargon of Akkad, of course, who conquered all the Sumerian cities around 2300 BC. So from the many broken sealings, we were able to reconstruct for the first time the complete seal of the governor, Lugal Ushumgal. And you can see him carrying an offering behind the divine image of Naram-Sin, who wears the horned crown, the emblem of divinity in front of the god Ningirsu. As for the administrative tablets belonging to this archive, well, they shed some really fresh and important new light on the control, the imperial control of the great city of Agade, or Akkad, over Girsu and all of the south of Mesopotamia in the 23rd century BC. We found some wonderful tablets containing plans of fields, plans of buildings, including this one, which is an annotated plan. These are some of the very earliest known architectural plans created anywhere in the world. As for the latest discovery, the most recent discovery, and this is very much breaking news, it follows the official announcement that was made only very recently by our colleagues at the Iraq Museum only a month ago in April, in the context of the handover of the finds of the spring 2025 season. And it is indeed a significant discovery, the discovery of a Sumerian library dating to the Old Babylonian times, to the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. Now this library was found in a building just south of the sacred precinct of Girsu, very close to the temple of Ningirsu. So from the remote sensing data and the drone photographs, we can almost reconstruct the entire plan of this building, this house, which is in fact built in a very typical Babylonian way with around 12 rooms and a courtyard. What is unusual, however, is that the building includes two levels, a ground floor level, as well as a basement level. The brick walls are extremely well preserved, about 2 meters high. The excavations have confirmed that shortly after the abandonment of this house in around 1750 BC, the wooden floors of the ground floor collapsed into the basement rooms, so sealing absolutely everything in situ. And this, well, as you can imagine, for archaeologists is really the stuff of dreams. We have so far just excavated one room of this building, a very small room, down to the foundations. You can see the height of the wall. In the collapsed layer of the ground floor, very thick layer, we found more than 50 tablets, cuneiform clay tablets, literary text, myths, and a number of magic texts, incantations, including beautiful incantations against the Sumerian demons, known as Udukrul, the evil demons, and the fate demon Namtar. We also found a number of other magic spells, including this terrifying incantation against snake bites. So it's very likely that this small library belonged to a college of incantation priests and their disciples specialized in magic, magic rituals, and exorcism. And what is absolutely incredible is that we also found a workshop, the apothecary of these incantation priests. So down in the basement, as you would expect it, underneath, sealed underneath the thick layer of the ground floor where we found most of the cuneiform tablets. So a workshop which included all the necessary tools, the pots, the bottles, the containers, the pestles, the mortars, everything they needed, well, to create, prepare the potions and the trinkets, no doubt used in the magic spells recorded on the tablets. Now this is an incredible tablet. This is in fact the only tablet written in Akkadian. All the other texts are written in Sumerian. And it has this beautiful passage, which is Shamash, so the sun god, is the light in the sky. The windows are the light for the house. I am indeed the light of your heart. Now, although this reads very much like a poem, this is not a poem. This is a magic love spell. It is a spell to make a woman fall in love with a man, and the man had to recite this phrase in the magic ritual. Now, it's probably not a coincidence that within this very small room, we also found this other most intriguing object. Now, this is a repurposed cuneiform tablet, which has the same size and shape as the love spell tablet. And it has, as you can see, what looks very much like the drawing of a woman. Now, of course, we cannot know for sure, but it's very likely that this object may have had something to do with the magic spell. As for the literary text, well, they are remarkable. They all revolve, and this is not surprising, around the great mythological cycles of the hero gods of Ningirsu. We found new manuscripts of a very important text at the time, known as Lugal-e. So Lugal-e was perhaps, it was one of the best sellers of Mesopotamian literature, as important as the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it tells the story of the triumph of Ningirsu, the hero god, over the archdemon and spellcaster Azag and his army of stones. We found entirely new compositions, literary text, including this beautiful tablet, which is in fact part of a bigger cycle. This is in fact the 6th chapter of this great new cycle, again revolving around the exploits of the hero god. This tablet deals with the hero, the weapons, the divine weapons, and the magic arsenal of the god Ningirsu. And perhaps finally my favorite, this is a historical text. This is a scholarly document written by one of these priests in the 18th century BC, who in fact copied and also annotated the inscriptions of Buddha, including the inscriptions on the statues of Buddha. And it's really incredible that the text starts with the standard inscription of Buddha, so the very famous text that has been copied time and again on thousands of clay nails and of bricks used by the king Buddha to build the Eninu temple. And it's also the text that we have used ourselves on the back cover of our own study of the temple built by Buddha. So yes, this is a fabulous discovery. It's very exciting, of course, for us. It's very exciting for our colleagues at the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. And it's just the beginning. I mean, we still have about 10 or so more rooms to excavate, including the courtyard. And of course, and this is part of the DNA of the project, we have already started working with Ebru on a conservation plan for this building, with the aim of making this Sumerian library building one of the new spotlights of the site of Girsu, alongside the bridge and the temple. So I'll hand over one last time to Ebru, who will talk a little bit more about the conservation strategy and the heritage plan for the site.
I'll be very quick, we don't have much time, but I just want to say that we not only, of course, have the bridge at Girsu, but as excavations proceed, we also are encountered with mud brick structures. And one way of protecting, one solution came up, turned out to be very effective on the site. And I want to talk about this one, where we had at site G very well preserved mud brick walls. We tried all textbook techniques of sacrificial plasters, using like fabrics to protect it against the sun and so on, but in fact none of them resulted as well as the following technique that I will talk about, which was inspired by the site itself. Site G was found deliberately covered under sand. So when it was abandoned, it must have been covered with sand for some reason, and that was the site where we found all our layers dry, objects, tablets, whatever that we found were dry, and the walls were very well preserved. So we were inspired by that, like how can we sort of use sand again to protect the mud brick walls, and we came up with the solution of using against these Farsi bricks that are produced in Karbala to create an offset wall, so like a wall just in front of 15 centimeters in front of the existing mud brick wall, and fill the gap with sand. And I have to say, it has proven very successful. We use a little bit of gravel in between to stabilize the sand, but when we, and this is a dry wall that we built without any mortar, which is a breathing system, and it's very easy to build and, in fact, open and rebuild again. So every season we check the results and we find our mud brick walls intact as we have found them. And this is the reason why at the New Old Babylonian excavations, we use the same technique. For the moment, we see it as a temporary intervention because excavations are ongoing, that we create these casing walls against the mud bricks and fill them up with sand very rapidly at the end of the season. And we can actually open them up the season after. And we are very happy with the results. And therefore, we are even developing the same technique for the conservation of the temple. What I want to further continue to discuss is that all of this actually sits into, in our mind, into a heritage management plan. So we want to we do not want to take some conservation measures on our own and leave the site behind, but we actually want to come up with a co-designed future for the site. And for that reason, we first started with who are the real stakeholders of this site, including the local tribe, the academics, of course, all the authorities, the funders, and we tried our best to contact and talk to each one of them to understand what do they understand from Girsu, what do they expect from Girsu. And this gave us a good opportunity, in fact, a good method to understand what sort of a living landscape, what is it today, what does it mean today to people. And we understood a lot of things, of course, obvious things, how Girsu is important as an historical site, but also how important it is for the locals, where they say they have no infrastructure, no schools, no health. The only interesting thing they have is Girsu in that region. We understand what they need. They have no roads, but they're hoping that if Girsu is developed into a touristic archaeological site, they can also benefit from it. So also, like we have spoken with scientists, that we are at a very climatically very endangered site. So all of this actually we put together in a kind of vision document. We put together everything we understood from these interactions, from these the way we consulted people, and we gathered them in a little document called Heritage for Future in Arabic and in English, where we discuss all the resources of the landscape. So Girsu is one of the resources of this landscape. We have water, land, flora and fauna, and we have a fantastic heritage community who attach themselves to the site since actually the 19th century excavations. And out of this, of course, this is one stone on the way to develop, to actually coming up with a sustainable development plan, which again, as I say, it's not the task of an archaeological project. But in that big frame, we do have responsibilities. We do have points we can address, problems we can address. And this is obviously scientific research, conservation, but education and training, as we mentioned, dissemination of the information. And we also believe we can tackle tourism and community development issues, because archaeological sites are not only scientific endeavors, but we are also in a way already an agent of development, where the way we produce income, the way we create cultural interaction, the way we are a platform of training. So this should not be overlooked. So archaeological sites are not only useful as touristic sites for tourism incomes, but it's also useful as long the projects, as long as they continue, they are agents of development. And training is one aspect of it. So we have actually started with focusing on heritage and site conservation in our training programs, but then we in fact enlarged the scope. Since last spring, we are actually integrating all methods of practices of interdisciplinary archaeology in our training program. And furthermore, again, in our efforts as our responsibilities, we work together with the Ministry of Culture how to open the site for tourism, for visits. And it's not only the Ministry of Culture, we also worked with travel agents, tour operators, how they see they can collaborate with the local tribe if they bring tourists, where would they want to enter, which structures would they like to see. So based on that, we developed in fact, visit route plan, and we developed a series of panels that we can put on the site. We designed them in such a way that they blend into the existing textures and colors with low, shallow walls where we hang inclined panels. And this was the season we actually implemented. We put 9 of them in place, which excited everyone, including our workers. And we are very excited to, in fact, welcome you next season, which is in autumn, where we hope to complete the main part of the bridge conservation and first phase of the tourism management. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.